Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here back recording That One Play, and we have an interesting one because it's not a historic Ravens play per se, but it's kind of an archetype for the 2019 season. And that's a particular play that I'm going to let Alan Frankel tell you about. And we'll do the lead in and why this play was important to him and why it meant something in terms of the 2019 Ravens.
Yeah, so this play was a play that I watched with a bunch of friends at a bar in the city, a Ravens backers bar called JoJo's Philosophy. Actually, I think it's been closed down, unfortunately. And this play was really special because it represented the apex of the Lamar Jackson era for me as a fan. This was the number one game, which I think back to in terms of the joy and dominance that this team displayed over that time period. And this 4th and 4 was kind of a meaningless play, actually. The game was already 35-6 at that point. This is late in the third quarter. And yet to me, it was really what made this team special and very unique from other Ravens teams.
Okay, so we'll give you specific. This is again the game against the Rams in LA. The Ravens were just rolling up for their fourth consecutive. Sorry, that's not even close to correct. Their seventh consecutive win, but their fourth consecutive utter trashing of a team. They beat the Seahawks by 14. That game was broke open late. Then they beat the Patriots by 17. That game was not as close as that score would indicate. Beat the Bengals 49-13, beat the Texans 41-7. And then they went out to LA and they played a pretty damn good Rams team that had just lost the Super Bowl the year before. Lost, correct? Not won it?
They lost to the Patriots, a tight one, yeah.
Yeah, 13-3 or something, or maybe a close one anyway. But the Rams that year got destroyed by the Ravens 45-6 in a game Eric Weddle described as peeling their faces off.
Shockingly accurate.
Weddle in his first year out there after leaving the Ravens after the 2018 season. But fourth down was the Ravens down in 2019. They went for it a ton of times. Harbaugh is extremely aggressive with Lamar Jackson, with the fourth down, probably the highest point of the I hate to call it analytics, sports math being applied to these kind of things, basic decision probability math being applied to these sorts of in-game decisions, but never been more than 2019.
Yeah, the fourth down stuff really, it almost seemed to, not to come out of nowhere, but it all seemed to hit us in a wave where we were this power running team now with Lamar. And in order to schematically make a lot of our offense viable, we kind of had to go for it on fourth down. It allowed us to run the ball in more downs and distances. It presented a lot more strategic things for defenses because if you're willing to run and get it to 4th and 2, all of a sudden that 3rd and 5 doesn't look as daunting. Certain things about that, not only on an analytical standpoint, but from like a schematic standpoint throughout the game, you don't know if you're going to run or pass. And it really opened up this offense in a whole nother way.
Yeah, you have to defend more space very, very naturally when you have to defend the run on third down, which is a lot of teams they don't even make any bones about it in terms of what they're trying to do on third down. They empty the backfield. Their quarterback is not the runner Lamar Jackson is. Of course, Lamar was a huge threat in that way as well. So you had to do all sorts of things to account for all 11. But you're right, in terms of the staying on schedule for that team was a very big deal. The 3rd and 5 was kind of on schedule. You had half the distance and half the downs you had allocated to yourself, and that wasn't too bad. So this team really went for it, leaned out on fourth down, trying to bring up those fourth down statistics for the season that year. But it's just an extraordinary number of attempts and successes.
Yeah, and that's what makes this fourth down really, really interesting to me because it really didn't do anything to add to win probability. The game was already decided here. We're looking at like 35-6 score. So this fourth down was a really unique time for us to go for it. And that's what I think made this fourth down very, very different for me, in that I felt that this fourth down call was that this team was having so much fun out there. They knew that they were doing something special on this night. We had, I think, 6 consecutive touchdown drives. We had it clicking on a historic cylinder, and it seemed like Harbaugh recognized that and just didn't want to stop the party at 11. And that's like literal and figural. It's a Monday Night Football game. And the joy that this team played with and the joy that the Lamar Jackson offenses have sometimes exhibited on the field really came to light on this play for me, where I was like, I'm sitting at the bar with my friends and they're looking at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, I think they're going to go for it. My friends are like, they're not going for it. They're 35-6. What are you talking about? I'm like, no. You don't understand what's going on here. They're going to freaking go for this because they're looking at me like I'm nuts. And lo and behold, Harbaugh brings out the players and they go for it and they convert on a pass to Miles Boykin and on a 15-yard pass. And I just had this feeling of like, wow, this team, it was able to recognize in the moment how much fun they were having as a team. And it was a human game. People were having so much fun together that they wanted to keep it going. I thought that was just extremely, extremely special historically from a team that hadn't had that type of joy on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you have less weapons, when you don't have Lamar Jackson, you do less of that. The team the year before had been a little more willing to go for it with Lamar as a fourth down weapon, but this 2019 team is a whole nother ball of wax. 17 out of 24 on third down. Not only did they lead the league, I believe, in fourth down attempts. Now, this is a case where the teams that go for it a lot on fourth down are often teams who are pretty bad, and they're consistently behind in games, and they're needing to gamble to try and catch up. So they need to go for fourth downs late in this game. That wasn't the case with the Ravens this year. They didn't have very many of those. They only had a couple early in the year when they lost some games. But basically, they went for it on fourth down because it was a positive expectation play. They went 17 out of 24 on the year, made over 70% of their first downs, and 70.8. But that also led the league by a wide margin in terms of percentage of fourth downs made. So they really had they through that point and actually till later in the season, they were on a historic non-punting pace as well, which was largely driven by the fourth down situation that did not end up getting that record for the fewest punts in a season, but they did come close. And of course, we've talked about this many times on the show. They scored 3.08 points per drive. So by and large, the fourth down decisions were big adds of value for this team.
Yeah, they really seem to embrace weaponizing the down. And I think that they particularly kind of relished it in that they kind of showed that they had a little more guts maybe than everybody else. I think Harbaugh likes to have teams that are a little bit like that they kind of believe in themselves at a certain level that maybe other teams don't. It's something that I've seen, in the best Harbaugh teams, they have a little bit of a deeper confidence, and that fourth down seems to bring out the bravado, whether it's, Harbaugh making things happen for safeties, like kind of like he knows a little something that you don't, and that the team's on the inside track. This definitely felt like a Harbaugh move when I think about the way he coaches this team.
Yeah, I think Harbaugh's a great leader of men. So one of the things we see from him on the field is converting what he wants to be the decision into the player's decision, which I really like. But the 4th and 2 at Seattle early in the year, he's like, "Hey, Lamar, you want to go for this? Hell yeah, coach, let's go for it." Then Yanda goes crazy with after Jackson then asks Yanda if it's okay. And I thought that was just one of the really highlight moments of that season. But the point I'm making about Harbaugh is that he turned that analytics decision into one that the players had completely bought into in terms of they're doing the right thing and they want to do it. So the hell yeah, let's go for it, coach. That's remembered as Lamar's decision or maybe Yanda's decision in some way on the sideline with the players they put on the field, but. In truth, it was the headset elves, as I call them, had a large part in that.
Yeah, I think you can do, an entire show on fourth down decisions, game analytics, and how it ties into kind of the human battlefield on the field and how those things kind of interrelate. I actually think we talked about maybe doing a show on that at some point. So covering this fourth down topic in more detail is definitely on the agenda. Plenty of cool things to discuss. The Kansas City play, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing you just brought up, Marshall Yanda, and all the stars going back and watching the highlights from this game that were on that team that are now elsewhere. Orlando Brown Jr., I think, Matt Judon. Now Chuck Clark obviously has left the team, but there's so many guys who I look at on that roster. Yanda obviously being one of the main ones of stars who, it feels like the Jackson era started yesterday, and now we're like 5 years in, and we're in like a contract dispute all the way at the end of that. That game to me feels almost like yesterday, yet it's been so long ago. And losing, it's been interesting. It was interesting to see those guys again in purple.
Yeah, it is an eternity, and it's each moment is so precious in terms of the opportunity that is presented. That 2019 playoff loss hurts that much more, given how good the Ravens were relative to the rest of the league. Uh, Bothersome, certainly. I think there are other analogous plays within that 2019.
Hold on to your beret. French bubbly for around $20 is here. Faire Lafette, your new fave French bubbles brand, is now available in America. With all the quality and less than half the sugar of Prosecco. Now, any reason is a good reason to celebrate. Look for the Faire Lafette green label in a store near you, or find a bottle of joy at FairLafetteWines.com today. Faire Lafette, imported by First Growth Brands. Please drink responsibly.
19 season, I remember in our production meeting earlier, we talked about in the very first game of the year, they beat the Dolphins 59-10, and Anthony Levine on 4th and 3, up 35-3 in the first half, ran a dive play on a 4th and 3 and ran for 60 yards to set up the touchdown, put him up 42-3. And Harbaugh was asked about it after the game and asked, aren't you concerned? First of all, wasn't it kind of a risk to do that? And he said, no, it really wasn't. I think it might have actually been 4th and 1, but he said, now if we can steal a possession, we'll do it whenever we want in this kind of heat. And this is as good a time as any. Well, what about giving away the fact that you have this fake on 4th down? It's a dive play. Everybody has this in their playbook. He's right. There's nothing special about it at all in terms of the nature of the play. It was just the moxie to go for it. And I think the 2019 Ravens, in a lot of ways, got defined very early on. Do you want to talk about the play itself at all?
Not so much. It's really the emotions behind the play. It was a 15-yard catch to Boykin. It was really more about the fact that they even were going to go for it. The fact they converted, obviously, keep the drive going. That was fantastic. But to me, it was really the whole thing was the fact that they even went back on the field. That was a huge, huge part of it for me.
Huge part of the 2019 Ravens for sure, and one of the very fun things was like you mentioned on 3rd and 5, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 6, any of those 3rd and medium downs, the Ravens were kind of on schedule. They were certainly a 3rd and 3 never seemed particularly daunting because this is 2-play territory is what you're saying. You're certainly in plus territory. You're thinking that, and even on your own side of the field, it's just a very special set of circumstances. And the Chargers are the one team since the Ravens did it so much that have adopted an even more aggressive stance with regard to 4th down. But the Ravens were on the front edge, on the leading edge, maybe not the absolute pioneer in terms of creating a set of going for it rules that certainly was very aggressive for that whole season.
One thing about that team is that it set a precedent that it was something that could be done and could be aggressively maintained throughout a year. Most teams think about a 4th down situation. Like you said, it's usually I'm down 10 points. I need to make up a possession somewhere, something along those lines. I want to roll the dice against the team. Maybe I'm a heavy underdog against. And I think it allowed guys like Brandon Staley that it now has a precedent. In law, you have a precedent and then it becomes an established fact and then people could do it. And I think that he kind of put his finger in the fire first. And, it's funny you're mentioning the Miami game because when I looked at this game, I wanted to see what, rankings on like from a score perspective, how many blowouts, where does this Rams game rank? And the 2019 season, I could barely get through it. There's like 5 of these blowouts of this level with that team. It's really wild when you look at it. I got the Miami game, the Bengal game, the Houston game, this game. There's like 4 or 5 different blowouts in this year that, you could choose as the, Ravens knock them in the teeth game of the year. But I think that this game against the previous Super Bowl runners-up was a game where you really felt they were going up against a well-coached team. This is a McVay team. They've always been well-coached. For them to go in and dominate them like they did, 6 straight drives with touchdowns, and I think they held them to 6 points completely. The first 2 drives, they had a net of 0 yards. I think it's -2 and 2 yards. So like full game domination, and uniquely for us on the offensive side of the ball, leading the way, and the defensive side of the ball, coming in second place on a night where they could have very easily been the story.
Yeah. So they did a bunch of things very well on the defensive side of the ball there. Marcus Peters kind of had his redemption with an interception late in that game. They held the Rams to 22 rushing yards. There were a bunch of positive things in a 45-6 win. The point of fact is that those 3 games are 3 of the most dominant games the Ravens have ever played. They were 3 in a row. the win at Cincinnati, the win against the Texans at home, and then the win against the Rams in LA. The offense has never been better for any 3-game stretch in Ravens history. That is the apex of Ravens offense, that 3-game stretch. And Lamar Jackson left each of those games early. And so the Lamar Jackson-led drives actually were like one punt and 14 touchdowns and a field goal or some such. It's just extraordinary what he did during that period. So people go back and take a look at that and see how far off I am. But it's not much because they basically scored at will against those 3 teams, and it was a lot of fun to watch.
It's funny you're mentioning hot streaks because I used to play quarterback in a rec league, and we went on a heater on offense. We once scored, I think, on 16 out of 18 consecutive drives, and we felt absolutely unstoppable. And I can obviously it's a rec league, and you can't kind of compare that to NFL, but I was definitely able to kind of relate to, wow, like being on that type of heater where you just feel like no team can stop you. You have what was weird was this team didn't have a lot of salary cap on the offensive side of the ball, yet they somehow had a talent edge and a schematic edge. It felt like the two things kind of went together on a team that didn't really have tons of resources. I mean, Marquise Brown, not retained. Hayden Hurst ended up not being retained as well. And Orlando Brown, like a lot of these guys are gone. You would think that a team that had a historic offense, like you look back at like the Peyton Manning offenses, they had guys that were there for 10 years, 6, 7, 8 years, like Harrison, Edgerrin James, Dallas Clark, Reggie Wayne. These guys were all there. It felt like forever. We could never get rid of them. It felt like, and this team was one of the best offenses in history. And it was just a 1-year perfect storm of events. It's really unprecedented in certain ways.
Very difficult to keep it together, obviously, with salary cap considerations. And Andrews, Stanley, and Jackson, we hope, will still be there in the future. But certainly very true. That 2019 offense is not appreciated enough in terms of cap. It's the 5th greatest offense in NFL history in terms of points per drive. And I hope Ravens fans ever will get there and stop and get over the playoff loss, because it is a point in time situation, and just realize just how great that team was. And beyond that, you mentioned the cap. On a per dollar spent of cap basis, it's probably the most efficient offense in NFL history. It's very close if it is not. So it's just so far an outlier. Expecting that again from Lamar Jackson or from the Ravens offense as a whole, or from the offensive coordinator for that matter, very unreasonable of Ravens fans. That's something I've always felt. We've got to realize how lucky we were for that year. I was one of the first people to say, basically, Lamar Jackson will never have a year statistically as good again as he did in his MVP year. It will not happen. It's such a statistical outlier in terms of the history of the NFL. It's one of the greatest seasons ever put together, certainly by an offensive player. And it's just unreasonable to expect him to be that, no matter what you think of your age modeling, relative to the thing. And extreme right-hand results, that's usually the case, is they don't get repeated.
Yeah, I think that's you mentioned a couple of points there. It's almost hard to know which road I want to go down. You kind of we had a conversation in our last episode about kind of taking things one game at a time and appreciating the whole. And to me, this was a little bit of a Steph Curry kind of situation. This was a team that managed to run the option. I remember when the Dolphins ran the Wildcat one year with some success, and then we whipped them in a playoff game. Like, it was the biggest deal when they were running the Wildcat. And then this team comes in and says the Wildcat was like child's play compared to what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And I really think that we might be heading towards a few teams trying out this Ravens model a little bit. I don't know if it's now. I know like Atlanta tried to imitate it a little bit this year. There's a few other teams.
The Eagles.
But I think we might see the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles also had a tremendous receiver and passing game, but definitely the Eagles come to mind in terms of, having that running quarterback and using that as a weapon. So we're starting to see teams kind of go away from, that's not an NFL offense. That's not something we can do. It once again, it's just like the fourth downs. It kind of paved the way in that area a little bit.
It's great to see the Ravens be on the front end of that curve offensively once too. It's a great thing. Alan, great to talk about this with you. It's a cool moment in time and a philosophical moment more than that one play moment, but still worth discussing here. And if that was the time the light went on for you, that's great. And it's certainly a great characteristic of that 2019 team. Appreciate you talking about with us. Tell people where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah, you could find me on Twitter, FrankSports21. I'm posting all sorts of stuff. Ravens, anytime any news, including the Nelson Aguilar signing, which I happen to like. Not everybody else loved it so much. That's the way it is. But that's where you could find me, FrankSports21 on Twitter.
All right, Frank. If you want to be like, like Alan, and come on again and do a That One Play episode, just hit me up at DM on Twitter. They're always open. Love to hear from you. We'll get you on very quickly. I'm recording several shows per week still of this type. We still have a lot, and Frankie, Alan, it'll be a while before this airs, but the world will have changed. You can hear we're doing this in the wake of the Nelson Aguilar signing. It's March 26th, but it'll probably be sometime in May or early June before this actually airs. But anyway, appreciate having you on, Frank. Alan, sorry.
Don't worry about
this
it.
Frank Sports 21 thing is really bugging me.
By the way, it's totally fine. Really, don't worry about it.
All right. Appreciate having you on, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.